You're listening to the Product Coalition podcast with Jay Stansell. This is where product mastery happens. This is where careers are made. Welcome to the Product Coalition podcast. Let's go.
G'day everyone. Today we're diving into the art and science of impactful AI with Connor Joyce. As Microsoft's first behavioral researcher and the author of Bridging Intention to Impact, Connor brings a wealth of experience to the table. We're going to explore why clear feature definitions are more critical than ever in the AI era and how they laid the groundwork for product success. Connor's going to share practical insights on crafting solutions that don't just meet users' needs, but also drive those meaningful outcomes we all strive for. So if you've ever wondered how to build AI-powered features that resonate deeply with users or how to position yourself as a change maker in your team, this episode is for you. Connor, so good to have this episode and this time with you on this topic. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Jay, thank you for having me. I'm excited to dive into a topic that I'm passionate about and love being on the show. So I'm still smiling from that intro.
Good to hear. Good to hear. I love starting with a smile. Connor, before we get into the topic, you've got a really interesting origin story as far as I'm concerned. Do you mind sharing with the audience what is that origin story that got you to this point?
Yeah, I'm a person who's always wondered if they want to lean fully into the academic side and continue to experiment with it. And these days, I've actually kind of merged both of them, which I'm so grateful for. So, in my undergrad, I did just traditional management track as thinking I was going to go into marketing or something of that sort. But the more that I leaned into it, the more that I got excited about psychology side of things, consumer behavior. Organizational psychology. So I decided, okay, I'm going to double major and do both the business and the social science. And through both those lenses is how I was introduced to behavioral science. At the time, I read the book Misbehaving by Richard Thaler, which is funny because so many people know Nudge and they know the book they know Richard Thaler for that book Nudge. And yet I actually hadn't read the canonical book of Nudge till years later. I read his other book, Misbehaving, which was all about Richard Thaler's career as an economist trying to define this field of behavioral science. And I wanted to walk in his footsteps, but instead of doing it on the academic side, I wanted to do it in the applied side. And so I joined Deloitte out of college. I was a human capital analyst there, and I worked to build a behavioral science practice at the firm. The reality was they had a huge change management practice. They didn't have much incentive to have to go and change that. And so I left, went and got a master's in behavioral science, wound up at Microsoft, as you suggested, first behavioral researcher at Microsoft. And then I've spent the last 5 years in research-related roles in the product space, all with this lens of how to apply behavioral science in a way that creates effective features. And I know we're going to jump into that topic, but I think the through line of my career really is that I believe that interventions are how we change behavior, and products are the best way to build scalable interventions.
Nice. I've got to ask before we get into the topic, Connor, what did you learn through that experience, both either in applied or educational experience, that changed you when it comes to analyzing behaviors and working out why we are who we are and why we do what we do?
I love that question. I love it so much. I was asked a similar version of it a couple of weeks ago, and while I was giving a talk, and I love the answer because it still makes me uncomfortable, but it's the truth. And it's that over now 10 years of doing both research at an academic level and applied work, I believe that we really aren't that unique. And growing up American, growing up in a very individualistic culture, we're all our own little snowflakes. And the more that I realized that we can really distill a lot of our decisions into predictable patterns. Now, I'm not one of these people who believes that we are anywhere close to being able to the specific behavioral level predict what someone's going to do. I'm not that strong of a determinist. But what I do believe is much easier, and especially with the advent of generative AI, is to deeply build empathy for another individual, really understand why they are acting the way that they are, how they are thinking, and be able to predict how they will continue to act because of that. Again, patterns, not specifics, but overall, what I think my learning for me is that is actually how I approach advice giving, or how I approach decision making in my own life. Is I think to myself, well, what are other people that were in this position doing, or what would they think? And the more that I either, again, make my own decisions or suggest other people make decisions based on that, the more I continue to hear back, wow, by just bringing up to that person how I was feeling, they were able to connect with me, or just thinking through, really building empathy for that person, I was able to predict what they were feeling, and then we were able to come to a solution. And the last point that I'll make on it, again, with generative AI, what's so beautiful and what really is kind of confirming about this, these huge models have been built on these just gigantic corpuses of human data. And the reality is that whatever someone is experiencing today, the likelihood is that another person experienced something very similar to it, and they wrote about it. And then these large generative AI systems have ingested it, and now we can predict what the outcome of that, or how to best handle it through interacting with those generative AI systems. And I think there's something both beautiful but also a little unnerving about it.
I love it, the connection between the humanistic values and the pieces that make us human, and the value we see in AI today, as a strong connection there. I appreciate that. Connor, let's get into the topic of feature definitions are the foundation of effective AI applications. This is close to your heart. It's very meaningful and important to you as a piece of work. But can I ask, before you were so consumed by feature definitions and AI, what was your world like before this? And therefore, why is this so important to you now?
So what I was in recall from my quick introduction, I was in consulting. I was building these large change management programs, and I was seeing that while they had an opportunity to work, many times they didn't. And if you look at the success rates of large consulting firms' change management programs, they're surprisingly low. And so I thought to myself, well, how do we do this in a more agile way using behavioral science? And I like to think of as traditional change management is like waterfall product development. Build,
Okay.
build, build, launch. Build, 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 launch. Behavioral science is much more like agile. It is small test, learn, implement if it's working, reconfigure if not, cycle, cycle, cycle. And so I was really intrigued on how to do this and how to pivot how we approach change management to be more like behavioral science. And so that was before I had even decided this whole product space. That was what I wanted to get into. And in my master's, I was like, that was where I made the connection of, okay, well, the best way to do this at scale is through technology. So a lot of great consulting companies and other firms building one-off solutions to solve problems, and that's tremendous, and that's very needed, especially for cutting-edge areas, for social or pro-social development, things like that. There's a huge need for these one-off interventions to help really change lives. But if we want to do it for these more gigantic problems, or maybe global problems like weight management, fitness, savings, things like that, for me, it just is, it became very easy to understand. It is products that are the way to solve those issues, as long as they're built in a behavioral science forward way, or in a way that's focused on changing behavior. And so I go, okay, obviously these companies are thinking this way. They have to be. And it was a very rude awakening, not just at the companies I've worked at, but being in the tech space. I talked to a lot of the companies, a lot of employees at companies, all like from large through startups. And it just is really uncommon for companies to think about, what behaviors are we changing with our products? And so that was a very rude awakening. It's an intro into where, and I'll talk more to why I think feature definitions are the way through that. But I think before this, it was just this belief that, well, it's very apparent that we must be like the people who have the power. They have to be thinking this way. They have to know that they have the potential to really build something powerful here. And the reality was that That's just not true. And there's an over focus on usage, which is the primary gold standard metric for pretty much every product, is just how much are people using it, which doesn't ultimately, it's a good metric for telling you if it's growing, but it doesn't tell you what it's doing. And then there's this over focus of just, again, of growth ultimately, and not thinking about, well, just because someone's using something, is it actually working? So that was the kind of the rude awakening that I've had and led me to the strong positions that I hold today.
Nice, nice. Well, let's stay in this space. We're talking therefore about outcomes, not outputs. The impact that the product is having. Let's bring it right away back to the start, though. Feature definitions as the foundation of effective AI applications. Why feature definitions, and what would you shape up as a strong feature definition as an example to get us going?
Yeah. So it really comes down to a very simple reason. It's because if you ask most product team members, why did you build that feature? There is not a uniform answer today. If you go and ask the marketing and the sales team, they're going to say, "Oh, well, there's a need from our customers, and we've heard this or we've heard that." If you ask the engineering team, it's going to be, "Well, we know we need to use this technology, and we're fitting it into a new place." You ask the researchers and the designers, they're going to say, "Well, we believe we've heard from our users that this is what we need." And if you ask the product person, there's going to be a collection of all of these different answers. And really, it's most of the time for the product person, it's just their intuition. They've heard a bunch of inputs and they just say that this is probably where we need to go. And that can be amazing. I like to say we wouldn't have smartphones if it wasn't for some pioneers that said people do need a calculator, a phone, a text messaging device, a calendar. They need all those things, a Palm Pilot, all within one device. You really didn't capture that through user research. It was somebody having product intuition. Product intuition also gave us Quibi. And for those of you that don't know Quibi, it was this very short-lived streaming service that was supposed to be like TikTok of high fidelity. It was the TikTok mixed with Netflix. And while it wasn't just the missed market opportunity, it launched during COVID, there was a few other things. It's a great example of somebody relying on product intuition. Obviously, as people want shorter content, they're going to want to have more. They're going to want something like Quibi, and then it just completely flopped. And so I say all of this to ultimately say, for me, the solution is starting with alignment. And the best way to start with alignment is with a definition. Just make sure that everybody on the team knows what is being built and why. It's the same reason with change management. If you're going to ask everyone to change, you need to make sure that everyone understands, why are we changing and where are we going? It's basic strategy. And so that is where the core of the feature definition encouragement comes from. I have my own way to define features, and I'll get to that in a second. But I want to also just be clear, like, yes, I have a book. Yes, I talk about feature definitions in the book a lot. But I'm not saying that mine is the only way to define features. There's a lot of great frameworks out there, and I try to build upon them in the book, because there's not one single answer to this. What the answer is, or what the panacea is just ensuring there's definitions that are easily accessible by everyone on the team, so everybody's swimming in the right direction.
Nice, nice. Let's go into that space, Connor. So the prerequisites in a hygienic ideal world are the product team's gone through product discovery. They've got a known problem, unknown solution space where there's 5 maybe solutions on the table. They've worked through, validated some hypotheses have proven true, some are false, and they're getting to the final point on the double diamond where they're like, okay, I think we know what we want here. What does that feature definition look like at that point? Because they've got all of the inputs, they've got the outputs from testing, they've got qualitative and hopefully quantitative insights to shape this up. Where do they go with that to get going on feature definitions?
So the 3 main components I believe are necessary to a feature definition are: you start with the user outcome. That is the center of the diagram. The user outcome is, to your point, what is defined through research, what is defined through any form of research, market research, user research. It is through product intuition too, can be a fine way of saying this is what we believe is the gap that our users need satisfied. Then you have two components, one on the left and one on the right. Preceding the user outcome are specific behaviors. What needs to be changed to ultimately create an impact to that user outcome? And then following the user outcome is what business outcomes will be satisfied if we do fulfill that user outcome. So again, it's specific behaviors that lead to user outcomes that yield business outcomes. So a very simple example of this, and I use fitness a lot just from my prior experience, and I also think it's very clear metrics, is if you have an app that's supposed to help someone build muscle, how do you actually do that? You get them to lift more often. You get them to lift heavier weights over time. You get them to do a variety of exercises. And maybe you try to get them to pick up other ancillary activities that are gonna help with muscle development. So now you have 4 behaviors that is the aim of the features that you develop, is to actually change those behaviors. And now you have the measurable behaviors. How much weight is that person lifting over a course of a month, and is it increasing? How often are they doing it? How long are they doing it? What diversity of exercises are they doing on a weekly basis? These are all measurable, specific behaviors that are connected to that user outcome. And ideally, you need to also have some sort of evidence that says that if we do that, people will continue to use the platform. So in this case, it'd be like, if I'm using this platform and I'm seeing myself gain muscle, I'm going to retain that platform. I'm going to continue to use it. I'm going to become a more loyal customer. I'm going to tell my friends, this is a successful product. You should go and check it out. And so that's when I say the user outcome connection. That again is the specific behaviors that connect to the user outcomes and then ultimately yield a business impact. And so to actually answer your question, now that we've defined this framework, that framework should, in my opinion, be used before design even happens. That what the team should have aligned on, what are we, so okay, we know our product's supposed to help people build muscle. That's easy, that's the outcome. We have a data, and we know from past experience, if we help people do that, they're going to continue to retain the platform. So we've got a solid, validated part of the user outcome connection. We know that when we satisfy the user outcome of muscle development, people retain the platform. Well, how do we go do that? We have some of these ideas of specific behaviors, and that's what we need to go validate now. That's what research can help with, is to understand and make sure that there is a connection between specific behaviors and user outcomes. Once that's there, then it's a design decision of how to go and build something that is going to change those behaviors the most. Which behavioral techniques can be used to create a change to those specific behaviors? What types of elements can we deploy within our user interface? Or what types of behavioral techniques like notifications or streaks or gamification? How can we change the ecosystem of our product? And each of those are features, each of those different deployments, to encourage those behaviors that lead to the outcome, that lead to the business impact. So ideally, you want to start at the beginning. So you're designing for behavioral change. But not everybody does. And somebody might be listening and think, okay, I don't have any new features right now, but I'd like to do this. And so I actually wrote the entire book to be retroactive. You're starting at the end. You're starting at, I already have a feature out there. How do I validate if it's actually working? And you can do the same thing. You just create this user outcome connection for something that's already out in the market. You go back and you think, why did we build it this way? What was our aim? And then you use the live data that you have to validate, is it actually changing behaviors? When it is working, is it actually satisfying outcomes? And is it leading to business impact?
Fantastic. You've shaped up so much in my mind here, Connor. In product, we often focus on leading and lagging metrics. in the KPI shape. But really, what I'm hearing you talk about when I think about the behavior, the outcome, and therefore the business outcome, is we've got leading and lagging behavior. Here we've got behaviors that we either want to happen or we need to change, so they start happening. And if they happen successfully, then that's a good bet that the lagging behaviors, the change, the things that happen after the workout, you'll eat healthier, you'll go back to the gym tomorrow, are more likely to happen as well. This is fascinating. Um, I'm gonna ask next, Connor, the behavioral definitions within the product space. Most people that I'm talking to aren't able to have the luxury of behavioral scientists in their team. They've got UX researchers, UX designers, but behavioral science is its own world. Can I ask, when it comes to identifying those behaviors to shape up that feature definition, and you don't have a behavioral scientist, where should you go to start thinking like one?
I'm going to answer that question, but before I do, I just want to build on what you said there about leading and lagging indicators, because I think that is such a great call out too. And it's funny, it's something that I have it in parts of the book, but I have only continued to see how important that piece is, because that's what makes Duolingo such a powerful product. And I imagine most people have been introduced to Duolingo, but if you're not familiar, it's a language learning app. So it is the language learning app. They have won multiple awards for best gamification. They have academic studies that show that if you use their product, it is as good as taking the first couple of years of a college level language learning class. And I believe that they're so strong and they built such a good product because they focus on both leading and lagging indicators. They make sure that every time you visit, you feel good. You get a reward. You feel like you learned a little thing. And that behavior continues, you continue to come back. And then over the long run, it's leading you towards the big goal of actually learning a language. Similarly, Peloton, who is a fitness app, and they make bikes and they have a fitness app themselves. They do a great job doing the same thing. They give you a big reward so you feel good every workout that you do. And so you want to keep doing workouts, which leads you to the bigger behavior of consistent fitness habits. So I just want to call out that's a great point. And it's a good tee up for your greater question, which is, well, how do we go and measure those behaviors if we don't have a clinically trained or PhD level behavioral scientist? And this is another passion area of mine, and it's one where I definitely am in a camp of some behavioral scientists that believe this, but there are many camps. And my camp, the one that I have really learned to believe is true, is that behavioral scientists should rarely be a job title. That really, for me, behavioral science is what I call a minor that should be equipped to many majors. So if my major is I'm a product person, my minor is I have a behavioral mindset. If my major is a researcher, which mine actually is, that is major is in like my job title. My minor is a behavioral scientist. Marketing major, behavioral science minor. There's a lot of these where I would much rather see many people on a team begin to bring in a behavioral science mindset rather than have it be this division that some companies have and get this special power. And if you don't have it, well, I guess you don't get to understand behavior. And I understand there is a deep science behind behavioral science. And I am not a PhD in this. There are many much more advanced behavioral scientists. But applied behavioral science is different. Applied behavioral science takes that very in-depth, deep level understanding of human behavior and it kind of flattens it. And it just says, well, how do we get someone to actually take this behavior today in this moment? And that is a skill set that one can learn without going and getting a PhD. That's a skill set that one can adopt with a minor. So to directly answer your question, well, how do you start to build that? There's a couple ways. One is literally just experimenting. It is just thinking through problems. Ethnographic research is a proper way to say it. Another one is go and watch people. Just watch people. What do you do in this situation? The classic jobs to be done framework was started because people just watched McDonald's shopping. I should say, I'm blanking on the professor's name, but he just watched people buying things at McDonald's and was like, why are people buying milkshakes in the morning? And then he asked them, and he began to really understand this whole framework behind it. So number one is just go out and watch people, try to understand what behaviors they take, document it, think about it critically. How can we replicate this? Number two is there's a lot of great educational materials out there. You can go formal with it, and there's lots of different. I have friends at a lot of different companies, so I'm not going to recommend any specifically. But if you go out and you just look, there's a lot of great resources out there. There's consulting firms that create tailored workshops. There's Marvin classes that are great for learning from peer to peer. So there's a lot of great educational resources that, again, don't require you to go and get a master's or a PhD. I'm a graduate of the Master's of Behavioral Science at UPenn. I will plug them because I also teach there. And so they are, if you really want to dive into it. But even with that master's, still rarely are those kids leaving and becoming quote unquote behavioral scientists. They are becoming strong minors in behavioral science applied to some sort of proper job, like a researcher or a marketer or et cetera. And then the third one, and I intentionally did this in my book to try to make this point, is that GPT is really good at this. It's just all the generative AI. And it circles back to the first question you asked me, is that human behavior is somewhat predictable and these systems are pretty good at understanding it. So if you are stuck and you don't know and you're like, what behaviors could we change for this? Generative AI is not the only solution you should use, but it's definitely one you should be using. And it is amazing if you go in there and say, give me 15 reasons or 15 behaviors which need to be changed to help someone learn a new language or to build muscle or to create an emergency savings. Those are pretty easy examples. It's going to do a good job, but you can go in there, and I've done this with, help me think through how I can help, what behaviors need to be changed to have people pass more data through a data pipeline. And it does a pretty good job creating some ideas there too. Are all of them home runs? No. And that's why it's not the only data source you should use, but it's a great brainstorming tool. So just to recap, three kind of main ways to think through how to build this skill set. One is just basic reading, getting in front of people, acting like a behavioral scientist. And you don't even really need to know what that means. If you want to know what that means, I one of the co-founders of Applied Behavioral Science Association. We have a set of standards for behavioral scientists. You can go and read that document. Those are some of the skill sets. Just go and try to learn them through experience. We're all people. And so interacting with other people, you are building behavioral science skills to a degree. 2, formal education programs. And then 3 is experiment with generative AI.
Awesome. So practical. Thank you so much for walking through that. One of the things you've touched on there that comes to mind for me, Connor, is over the last 10 years, there has been so much focus in the tech space on, move fast and break things type mindset. And I honestly, I've been fortunate to have some awesome research experiences. I remember a contextual inquiry experience I had 10 years ago of really getting to watch people in their homes silently and engage with industrial design products. The tech industry has been so much about moving rapidly that I think there's a lost art to research that has been missed and that is coming back now, where actually take your time and do some proper research and you will find some significant new opportunities to identify growth. And the thing that you got me wondering about now is, the big tagline for the last 10 years has been around product-led growth. I wonder if the next 10 years is going to be around behavior-led growth, and we'll start heading in that direction and respecting the research practice and giving it much more time instead of trying to move so rapidly all of the time.
You and I are going to have to separately talk about that keyword, because if you just coined behavior-led growth, that's a good word. I've not thought about that, but that's a good one. I like that a lot, and it's true. And I think that there is, because product-led growth is immediately tied to growth. Like I should say usage. Usage is like, it is all about usage, and it doesn't think about, well, what happens when someone uses it, which doesn't matter at first. But what happens and what and I have this I share this anecdote because I've seen it so many times is I will be pulled into, whether it be in my jobs or in my consulting engagements, a company that says, we built something and it was growing so fast, people were loving it, but now we have a huge leaky bucket and we don't understand why. And I'm like, well, why are people leaving, do you think? Well, we don't fully know why. Okay, well, that's a problem in its own right. Well, let's go figure out why. But still, what would be the underlying reason that you think? Well, there's probably other things out there that they're going to. The switching cost is low. Well, why is the switching cost low? Because it's probably not working. And if you're using something and you're thinking to yourself it's not working, and then the new shiny object comes, well, you're going to go check out the new shiny object and see if that thing works for you. And so that's the problem with product-led growth. I'm a huge fan of product-led growth. I think it's a great way to ultimately scale a product. And if you build the most successful behavioral changing device and it never leaves the academics or never leaves the institution, well, then that's a problem in its own right too. But the product-led growth has, I believe, led to this overhype cycle of, okay, we need to continue to grow as fast as possible without ever really thinking about, well, are people retaining it because it's working?
I'll keep riffing on this. I'm now wondering whether product-led growth is for startups and behavior-led growth is for scale-ups, and that's the maturity inflection point that organizations go through. But we'll have to do a whole different podcast on this line of thinking. I'm going to bring it back to the topic title today, Connor, around feature definitions, particularly for the purpose of AI enhanced features. We've spoken about the creation of feature definitions and the framework you outlined, but why for AI in particular do you see so much value in this approach?
So I gave a talk at Pandemonium this year. Great opportunity, great audience, a lot of executive level and CPOs, heads of product. I gave this talk where it was based on this topic of I introduced the user outcome connection, and then from there I pivoted and I introduced them to another framework that I'll probably reference here, but it's a way of determining if AI should be used. Spent 30 minutes, 15 minutes of questions and answers, great conversation with the audience. And afterwards, I was doing a book signing. And I asked most of the people that were coming up, you caught my talk? Great, great. What did you take away from it? And across the board, it wasn't the frameworks. It wasn't any of this whole philosophy behind it. It was the first slide that I had on the deck, which asked, why are you putting generative AI in your product? And so many of them pretty much said, your talk made me pause and think to myself, should I be putting generative AI in all of these features? It was both a win because I was glad because that was the point I was trying to make. I also think I could have probably done my whole talk just on that and not built out all these advanced frameworks. I guess at least I'm going ahead of myself a little bit, but that's why. That's why this is so important because we are in this hype cycle right now. And it looks like it's beginning to wane. There's been a couple posts and articles over the last month that's saying like, okay, we might be actually slowing down a little bit. But regardless of the pace right now, everyone is feeling the pressure of, I need to get generative AI somehow into my product roadmap, somehow into my feature development. There's a lot of pressure. Marketing is out there selling features with generative AI before they're actually developed. There's promises being made, and everyone's waiting. When do we get this 10x return from all this gigantic capital investments that are being made right now? So to answer your question, ultimately, is feature definitions help lay out what are we building. And then if we recall back to what I was saying of having the specific behaviors defined before you start design allows you to design the features in a way that maximizes that behavioral change. And in doing so, you get to decide, is the tool of generative AI or the framework that I like to reference, the superpowers of generative AI? Couple examples I'll give is content creation, summarization, perspective taking, things like that. Are those superpowers the right tool to change that behavior? Or is a traditional method? Is a notification actually the better method? Is it a streak or a gamification element? Is it just an onboarding flow? What about that feature needs generative AI? And when I say that feature is about how that feature is going to change behavior, needs generative AI. So having that feature definition allows the team to avoid escaping into the what if, how do we go and like how do we fit the solution into a problem, and it forces them to think about what is the problem that we're solving for and is generative AI the right solution for it.
I love this. And it's a familiar point for me, Connor, when it comes to people I'm coaching, mentoring, because they're struggling with answering why or the so what to exactly that question. And what I'm quite surprised about is there's been so much acceleration and focus on generative AI finding its way in the roadmap and the backlog. But then when I'm working through and understanding their backlogs, there's so much opportunity in there for simple classification problems and using ML for solving classification or regression, type solutions. And so they've jumped past the old school ML that has been around for 30, 40 years that could already be in their product and is well established, well known, and comes with a lot less angst than generative AI. And they've skipped past all of that and are jumping on the trend of trying to work out how to get Gen AI into the product because either promises to investors, promises to shareholders, or they just feel they're not keeping up with what everyone else is doing. So it sounds very familiar, and I like the way you framed it. It's the same old solution looking for a problem that we saw back in 2017 when people were trying to put blockchain into everything and using that to demonstrate new value when actually if it doesn't solve the problem or a problem, then really work out a way to push back with your leadership and challenge it.
Because otherwise it's just not sustainable. And it is a way to just continue to throw resources, and these models are not cheap. And scaling up a team to build these models into a product is an effort. And it's unfortunate because I'm seeing this, and I've seen startups come and go just in the last year from the same issue. And to your point, like, and it's funny because I am so steeped in generative AI that I didn't even reference that. I was talking about things that I'm familiar with still, like gamification stuff. But you're right. There's this whole like just AI. Like before you even go into other features, just think beyond the subset of generative AI. What about the big set of AI solutions and ML solutions, and then the big design toolkit that all designers or most designers should have access to? So yeah, that's a great call out.
Nice. Wrapping up, Connor, what are your favorite turn points when it comes to frameworks and improving ways of thinking? We've spoken a lot about feature definition here today and AI, but you've got your book, you're doing talks around the world as well. But when it comes to things that people could look up, practical points today, whether it's frameworks, books, or other, what would you suggest people could do to level up their focus and improve themselves on this topic?
I want to answer this question in two ways. The first is, I'm still a huge fan of jobs to be done and design thinking. So these are pretty standard at this point. So I don't think that's going to be new. But if you're not familiar with those two, for sure, just bring yourself up to speed with that type of thinking. There's some great behavioral science frameworks. One of them is called Make It Tools. And that is a collection of 15 of these like cards that they have, which are a bunch of different behavioral techniques. Make it easy. And then there's a whole bunch of ideas on how to make something easy. Make it social. Whole bunch of ways to make something fun and social. Make it timely, etc. So I think that's one of my favorite frameworks. I also there's a author named Steve Wendell who has a book, and he has two great frameworks in it. One of them is called Create, and it's 6 steps. If you're trying to get someone to take a behavior, it's 6 steps on why you're going to lose them. So the first one is the cue of the. So you're trying to cue them to do something, and if you don't actually trigger them to take an action, it's never going to work. So now that one's gone. Next is reaction. If they've been burned by it before, they're probably going to be like, nah, I'm not going to do that again. So you need to figure out, well, how do you lower that reaction. But that's a good framework. He also has another one called Define in his book. So I think those are actually some of the best behavioral design frameworks that exist. Huge fan of his work. I want to call out that that's the true frameworks. The piece I think is missing, and you see it in a book like Lean Startup. You see it in a couple of different books that are escaping my mind right now. But I from conversations I have about like the philosophy of my book and of other canonical books in this space, is these are great insights, but I need my chief product officer to actually sign up. I need my head of product. I need them to sign off for this. Otherwise, it's never going to work. And I don't believe that. And I don't believe that because I was able to implement some of these as a 2 years within a year or two within tech at Microsoft, which is a gigantic organization. And I did ultimately get leadership support, but I had to just start. I had to be a grassroots movement. And I'm a huge proponent of that. I think that a lot of this stuff, everyone wants to build good products. I truly do believe that people that get into the product space want to solve problems. They want to help. But then they get lost in the incentive game. They get lost in KPIs and OKRs that demand things that aren't actually good building products. So if you can find the way to do both, maximize the OKRs and the KPIs, but also build something that works, then just start however you can. Go and download a template for whether it be from my book, which you can find on my consulting website, Desired Outcome Labs, or if it's just going and doing it with Jobs Be Done or design thinking, and create a definition for your feature and share that with people and get their feedback. Ask whoever owns a feature that you think is not working, why did you build that feature, and see what they say. And if they don't have a solid answer for you, say, hey, maybe together we can define it, and then go and experiment. Start small. Start today with just whatever you can to get people thinking. And I believe that again, grassroots movement is the best way to actually enact change in this type of thinking. And now is the time to do it, because there is a lot of afraid business people that are seeing money being poured into generative AI. And in a capital market where we're expecting 10 to 20x returns on this capital investment, people are like, they're scared. They should be, because we are dumping cash into this. And so if you can become a voice of saying, there is a chance that we can do this a lot better, and I'm beginning to show it through these different techniques, through these frameworks, through these approaches, I think that there's a huge opportunity to really create a strong movement.
I love that, and I think that's sound career advice. Whether you're looking at AI product features or anything else, to be honest, in order to accelerate your presence, your political capital, and your path from a career perspective. Connor, thank you so much for this recording. I've really enjoyed this session with you. It's been awesome to talk about some of the science, but also the application. We've covered how this impacts so many roles throughout an organization as well. So I've really enjoyed our time together. And afterwards, I'm certainly going to be Googling behavior-led growth with quotes around it to see where else that may have been coined. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jay. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. For the audience watching, thank you so much as well for joining Connor and I with your time. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to know more about Product Coalition, please head over to productcoalition.com. Until the next episode, thank you very much.